All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Zach Jones with Vertical Measures, and I'm here hosting VM's monthly webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Navigating Between What Google Says versus What Google Does, and will be presented by our Senior Director of SEO Services, Jim Bader. Jim brings over 15 years of SEO and e-commerce experience to the team. He has held a variety of SEO leadership positions with agencies and successfully managed in-house SEO teams. It's obvious around the office that Jim is very data-driven and can often be found digging into web analytics to analyze performance to see what strategy is working and what can be improved. But before we get started and I hand over the presentation, I just want to have a few housekeeping. I just want to announce a few housekeeping items to note. Today's webinar will be available for viewing by tomorrow, and we'll send out an email with a link so you can watch it and review the slides. We'll also be happy to answer any questions throughout the webinar. Just make sure you click on that questions or chat tab on your interface there and ask whatever you want. You could also go onto our Twitter and tweet at us at #VMWebinar, and we'll check those as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jim. Here you go, Jim. You there, Jim? Well, let's see where Jim's at. You still on mute there, Jim? Well, hold on one sec. I will run over to the other room and see if I can see what's going on with Jim's mic.
So a good webinar wouldn't be anything without a little technical difficulty, so thank you for hanging out with us. So thank you everybody very much for attending today. This webinar is actually a continuation of an article that I wrote for the VM blog back in March entitled Successful SEO Strategy in 2017 That Doesn't Require Drinking Google Kool-Aid. So if you read that one, you may see a few similar points, but if not, just sit back and enjoy the ride. So today I want to set this up with a little background on Google. I want to share some examples of how often what they say isn't really what the algorithm does. We want to cover some of the SEO strategy that still works. I'll share some final thoughts, and we should have some time for some Q&A. So let's jump right in. So for those of you that work in the SEO or search industry, you're well aware that it's Google's world. We're all just pretty blessed and able to work, live, and play in it. And as marketers, we receive the message loud and clear that we must play by Google's rules or else risk the consequences. In fact, Google has become so powerful and well-branded now that they're pretty much synonymous with search. Very few companies ever achieve this level of branding nirvana. A couple that come to mind are Starbucks with coffee or even Kleenex with tissues. These companies, the products are actually secondary to the brand itself. But how does Google, how do they get so much power? And how much do they have? So let's flash back to the January of 2005. That's 12 years ago. At that time, Google had just recently surpassed Yahoo as the search leader, but it was pretty much still a level playing field with 3 legitimate contenders vying for your search activity. MSN and Yahoo were a combined 48%. Google was still up and coming at 35%, which was just 4 points ahead of Yahoo. If you fast forward that to today, there's not really any legitimate contenders. The search market share tells a very different story now, and Google is far and away the industry leader with over 78% of all desktop and mobile searches combined. Bing and Yahoo now are a combined 13%, which is far and away behind Google. And there's not really any signs of that changing anytime soon. In fact, Google has really become a search monopoly. There's no real threat of losing that market share. So over the next half an hour, I want to share some observations that we've made regarding Google's approach to managing their algorithm and how often what they say doesn't match up with what really still works with the algorithm. In fact, Google in many ways has kind of evolved from that benevolent search engine that once had the mantra of do no evil, and they've kind of evolved into a schoolyard bully in how they treat SEOs and online marketers. Although they continually try and downplay the effectiveness of some of the standard best practices, they still actually work with the algorithm. So before we dive into some examples, I do want to be fair to them. It would be disingenuous of me not to point out some of the good things that Google has done that's kind of propelled them to become the search engine rock stars that they now are. They made a commitment to quality and the refinement of the search results with the end goal of really improving that experience for the searcher. They have helped to evolve the content from what it was at one point, often just small blocks of recycled content that was often unreadable, and have evolved that to rich and valuable content that searchers actually now consume and interact with. And they've kind of wrangled in a lot of the black hat tactics that used to be very effective, but made search unpleasant for visitors and for the white hat marketers. They've made it much more attractive to build content the right way for the consumer, instead of continually finding ways to manipulate the algorithm. And they shifted our focus from needing to load up page content with a bunch of verbatim keywords. And as a search engine, they have a much better understanding now of how semantic words contribute to the overall intent of the search query. And finally, they really saw where mobile was headed early on, and they've kind of pushed website owners to adapt and to be ready for this shift. So there are a lot of good things that Google's done to earn their market share. But what we really want to focus on today is really how they've gone about this. So a lot of this evolution has also been spurred on with fear and with the threat of penalty. So they've chosen to control some of this messaging by making online marketers afraid instead of just partnering with them to create a better experience. So a lot has already been published about the Google animals, but pretty much if you live in this space, you've heard of panda, you've heard of penguin, you've heard of the hummingbird. So I won't go into detail on these, but I will say that with these updates, Google really went head on against websites that published just junk content, used nefarious link and SEO tactics. They used over-optimization and keyword stuffing, and were really hyper-focused on winning for specific keywords. It's how Google went about it that I kind of want to call out today. So let's jump in with some examples of how often what Google says is one thing, but what works with the algorithm is an entirely different one. My first example is the thought that Google has tried to instill in all of us that keywords just don't matter anymore. The conditioning of the masses actually started back in 2009 when they officially removed the keyword meta tag from the algorithm. And I think we all understand why they did that. It was massively abused. It was way too easy to manipulate. It was not trustworthy. But this did signal the end of one era and the beginning of a kind of new philosophy in Google. And in November of 2011, they switched to encrypted search, and they removed the ability for marketers to track that organic traffic and tie it to specific keywords. This was a pretty huge blow to search marketers, as it took away one of the valuable ways that we could tie value and page level success. In September of 2014, they released the Hummingbird algorithm. And as I mentioned a little bit, this included a heavy focus on understanding the semantic meaning behind a query. A lot of the propaganda that was circulated around this contributed significantly towards shifting the focus away from specific keywords towards a more conversational search and understanding the intent of the content in the query. One of the most kind of egregious sleight of hands happened when Google's own John Mueller stated in a Google Hangout that, quote, he doesn't think it's worthwhile filling the title tag with keywords with the hope that it will lead to higher rankings. And there's been other recent studies and industry sources that have kind of come out to support this, such as the search metrics rebooting the ranking factors. Their report states that only 53% of top 20 ranking websites still use the main keyword in the title tag compared to the previous year. But what does the Google algorithm actually do? To answer this, I'm first going to point to our own experience as a successful SEO agency. So the keywords that are placed in the title tag and other SEO elements absolutely do give that page the best chance of ranking. We continue to use standard best practices and optimize for keywords that are important to each of our clients' specific vertical, and they continue to have incredible success. Now, it could be that Google's not necessarily saying keywords aren't important, but they're trying to just downplay the hyper-focus on them. Our concern is that by making these highly publicized statements, they're really kind of purposely trying to get website owners to change their strategy based on what they say. And this could very well lead to a loss of rankings and traffic for them. With the industry sources that support this position, I'm willing to bet that they're looking at high-level, very competitive phrases where there's a lot more ambiguity, and the search results are trying to cover several potential semantic meanings, not necessarily the longer tail targeted phrases that actually drive the bulk of the organic traffic. So here's an example. We're partnered with a LASIK eye surgeon here in the Phoenix metro area. They've been a client of ours for several years, and our team handles much of the SEO strategy and content creation for them. We analyzed one of their money keyword phrases, LASIK eye surgery. They are ranking in the top 10, and this chart shows the optimization for all of the top ranking sites for that query. The X indicates where there's a verbatim match used in that element, and the P shows where there's a partial match. So for this client and for the others that are ranking around them, standard SEO best practices still work and work very well. And here's that client's current organic search. So January through May, year over year, it shows that what we've implemented for them continues to work quite well. They've seen a 65% increase January through May, year over year, and a 74% increase year over year just for May alone. This is only one example. I'll show some numbers later on that really clearly demonstrate that what we're doing for our clients is working across the board for them. So another example of what Google's often told marketers is to avoid link building. So this is another example of conditioning of the masses, and it came from John Mueller again. What he said in a Google Hangout was that he would avoid focusing on link building, as it will probably lead to more problems for your site than it would help. In March 2017, the Google Webmaster Blog posted, "If you do guest blogging or article publishing for the purpose of link building with the intent of manipulating the Google search results, this is something that Google can and does penalize for." But what Google does, adding quality links to your site still continues to be a factor. Unlike with keywords, this seems to be one tactic that we kind of all now agree on. Several reports have been published recently that show that link building still is effective and it works very well, probably better than Google would like to admit. The one study that I will reference here is from backlinko.com. So they studied 1 million Google rankings and found a direct correlation with the number of domains linked from and top 10 rankings in the Google search results. This is just one of many that support the reality that getting quality backlinks from authoritative websites still works. Ironically, this tactic Google even agrees on too. So there's several comments here that I'm going to show that from Google reps, and they're all referenced from the Moz State of Links report. So in Google 2014, Matt Cutts, who was at the time the head of Google Web Spam team, stated that Google had tested search quality without links, and it was found to be inferior. March 2016, another Google senior strategist stated that contents and links are the #1 and #2 ranking factors. And in October of 2016, Gary Illis stated that Google doesn't really have an overall domain authority, but that a text link with anchor text is better with the algorithm. These comments are a little confusing and a little contradictory. So next is an example of where Google came out with a very strong messaging and communicated urgency only to dial it back significantly. And that was when they came out and said that companies that offered an unfriendly mobile experience to their users would be penalized. Because of the magnitude of this potential impact, it was kind of dubbed by the SEO industry as Mobilegeddon. And in February 2015, Google warned webmasters that desktop organic traffic would suffer for a poor user experience on mobile device. Now, at the time, I was managing the in-house team at a well-known healthcare company in Rhode Island. We were in development with our mobile site, but we also knew that because of the slowness of our processes with development, that we would never be able to launch it, a friendly version, in time for what Google was warning. So our team made sure that our VPs and the broader digital team were aware of the potential loss of traffic, and we kind of just braced for impact. However, in April 2015, Mobilegeddon launched with minimal impact on the search results. Our mobile traffic actually stayed flat, and it actually took a slight upturn later in the year, so that was a little hard to explain. I'm sure that there's many stories of other SEOs like us who took Google at their word and were a little embarrassed by communicating such urgency only to see it arrive with such a whimper. In May 2016, Google kind of dialed that back and delivered a softer message when they announced that websites could see a ranking signal boost for mobile-friendly sites. And more recently, in November of last year, the Mobile First Index was announced. This message was that this version of the index would be refreshed much more frequently, giving everybody the clear impression that it was more valuable to them than desktop. So what Google does, it's really kind of taken over two years to see any significant results from what was such an urgent statement. What does all this mean? Not much. Some searches have been affected, we have seen that, but it's not close to the magnitude that Google has warned. It was also recently communicated that the mobile first experiment from last November has, quote unquote, proved to be more challenging than they had anticipated, and they're now pushing the launch to the end of 2017. But they've added to that it's probably not realistically going to launch until 2018. So for those companies that rushed out and slapped together a mobile-friendlier site just to beat the deadline, really had more time than they thought. And Google's come out and confirmed that they will continue to index your desktop site just fine. So yet again, the message changes. So we're really in no way advising companies to not build a mobile-friendly site. We do know that mobile has surpassed desktop in search queries. So it's our position that every company should have a user-friendly mobile site. The message here is just that there was no need to feel threatened and rush the launch of a mobile site. You would have been better advised to just take your time and proceed to develop a really good one for your users. So my last example of where Google started with this one, they started with softer messaging and then kind of elevated the urgency. And that's with website security and HTTPS. So in August of 2014, Google announced that a ranking signal boost for sites that went secure, which was a positive spin. They said that they're committed to making the web safer, and part of that is ensuring that websites that people can access from Google search are safe and secure. This changed a little bit in October of 2016 when they announced that sites that are currently on HTTP and are collecting passwords or credit cards will be marked in Chrome as non-secure. So that comes off a little bit more threatening than the original message. And they recently released the Google Transparency Report. And in this kind of shapes the spin that users now prefer to browse through HTTPS, and it sets it up that it's becoming the norm. And really, this is meant to reinforce that, hey, everybody's doing it, and you should be too. So what Google does, we really have yet to see HTTPS have a lot of impact in the search results. We are seeing them appear more often, and we all agree that secure websites are better for your user. Our issue with this is that migrating to HTTPS, while it's easy for smaller sites, and all it really requires is getting an SSL certificate, and there's even WordPress plugins that'll make this pretty easy for small sites. However, for enterprise level or dynamic websites, this can be a huge undertaking. When there's tens of thousands of pages of traffic to consider and a lot of connecting components that also must change to keep it all working, it's not something that you can just roll out because Google threatens. So did Google understand this dynamic? And that's why the initial messaging started out softer and now it's kind of been ratcheted up. I do think that's the case. Google gave everybody a softer warning, and now they're trying to drive up the urgency just to get adoption. And this is the trend in the transparency report. And I believe that that slow and steady increase really shows that companies have taken website security seriously. It's just taken a long time for them to implement. I think if we saw them reacting to Google's threat, we would have seen a sharper upturn a little bit earlier. So now that we've covered a few things, a few examples of where Google kind of contradicts themselves and comes out and says things and then does another, let's focus on what works. So the most important advice that we can give you is that SEO best practices really haven't changed a lot over the last 10 years. Most of what worked still does work. So we want to make sure that you solve for any technical issues with the website. This is not an exhaustive list, but just some of the red flags that we've seen that can stop your organic search in its tracks. So the search crawlers need to be able to access every page, just like users. All content must be indexable. So review all of your web programming and your design elements. Be sure that there's no technical roadblocks with these. Use a logical site hierarchy or taxonomy for your content. One of the biggest challenges that we typically encounter is when all of the site content exists right off of the root domain in a flat structure versus placing them in a logical folder style structure like is shown here on the screen. Search engines, they can come in at index your site from any given web page. So when you have a logical hierarchy, it lets them understand how each piece of content fits into that overall structure of the site. Always use a logical navigation. Be sure that all of your important pages, and I would hopefully all of your pages, are easy to find and navigate to from the home page through a logical navigation structure. People are really impatient, and they generally won't click around a lot unless they find a reason to continue and can bounce from your site. And be sure that your pages load quickly. Now, this is an important ranking factor. We find that the biggest offender to this is usually very excessively large images. We recently found a website that was actually loading a 2000 by 2000 pixel background image. So be sure to save images in a web-friendly file type, JPEG, GIF, and at the smallest file size possible. Create multiple versions for the different screen sizes for desktop, tablet, and mobile. That's another thing that we see often. So the tried and true best practices really haven't changed much over the last 10 years, as I mentioned. We'll go through these quickly. SEO-friendly URLs, it falls in line with having an understanding of how each piece of content fits together. Always use canonical tags. So this is really critical for large dynamic sites and even for small sites, just to be safe. There's not really any reason to leave potential duplicate content issues to the search engines to sort out when they've created an easy way for us to manage this proactively. Unlike what Google says, use the keywords in the title tag. This is still arguably the most important SEO element. Test with variations of your keywords, singular versus plural, verbatim versus semantic, even proximity and keyword weight. So some of these are older thoughts, but our advice is really to see, like old school, what's working with the top ranking sites and test and iterate. The meta description, I think it's clear that it's worthless to the algorithm now, but it's very important for click-through rate. So be sure to use your important keywords in that meta description, as they will be bolded in the search results, and that can help them to stand out from the other search listings. Write them with a marketing style, or even include a call to action. And consider testing with the use of a phone number. This actually could get you a conversion right from the search results. Use your main keyword or semantic variation in the H1 and the other header tags. And it doesn't have to be an exact match to the title tag. This is another misconception that we read and we see out there. And another factor that's gaining momentum is the use of structured data or microdata. So visit schema.org, be familiar with all the different sets that are available, and use all of the ones that apply to your website. This could even get you a rich snippet in the search results, as Google's always messing with the layout and the way that content is displayed in the listings. And the rich snippet can be a traffic gold mine if you're able to achieve it. And microdata is also critical for local search visibility for companies that have many locations. But the most important message that we can leave you with is that building quality content that users actually read and interact with is the most important factor. There are recent studies that indicate that the trend is moving towards a larger total word count. So again, backlinko.com indicates that that magic number for a #1 ranking could be 1,890 words. Although we agree that certain types of content will require more words, some pages don't always require it. So content that's really closely tied to the brand or company, such as services or location information, it's still possible to perform well with less words, but it's pretty clear that the direction towards richer and deeper content is the direction that the engines want to see. So again, with all of this, adopt the methodology of ideate, test, iterate. And as we said, create content for visitors first, the search engine second. It's much more important to use the number of words necessary to fully answer the questions that a searcher might have when they visit your page than it is to go for some magic number because you think the search engines will rank you better on it. And the other important factor is to keep building quality links. So the internet was built with links, and it continues to function at its core with links. So as much as Google hates to admit it, there will always be a factor with the algorithm to some degree. And although it's time consuming, old-fashioned outreach and research still works. But I will say that, that we've seen a trend towards more websites wanting to monetize that, so be very careful with it. What we see working really the best is when we create what we call linkable assets for our clients. And these are pieces of content that are kind of viral in nature or have some natural draw to them. These are pieces of content that people naturally would link to. And these, some examples of these could be infographics or unique statistics or even articles from subject matter experts. So another controversial topic that there's been some spin on and Google's actually adjusted, but we're seeing it make a slight comeback, is the use of keywords in the anchor text. So keywords in the anchor text actually still has an effect on the algorithm, as much as Google hates it. The key here is that the anchor text should look natural and not manipulative. If you overdo it, you're definitely going to have problems. So be smart and tread with caution, but understand that it still has an effect on the algorithm. And clean up any toxic backlinks. So we continue to see this as a critical effect, affecting some of our clients. So we may, in the beginning of an engagement, ask them, have you done any suspicious link building in the past? The answer is invariably no. But when we do a backlink audit, often it turns up a bunch of red flags. So this can really kill your SEO campaign. Google does now say that they'll ignore these types of bad links, quote unquote, but really don't leave it in their hands. I mean, either attempt to have them removed if you've seen a large number of backlinks off of a domain that looks suspicious, or even disavow them with the disavow file in Search Console. So let's move on to some final thoughts. The biggest one that I can leave you with is just don't drink the Kool-Aid. So the standard best practices that we've used before still work, although you may need to test with it and watch how they're returned in the search results to know for sure. What we know doesn't work is continuing to try and game the algorithm. So I'm not going to tell you that some of these black hat tactics don't work, because some still do, but Google will eventually find them and they'll eventually shut them down. And don't just take the latest rumors as facts. There's a lot of misinformation out there and many knee-jerk reactions that eventually work their way back to center. Believe what you can actually see in the search results. If what you're reading or hearing doesn't sound or feel right, or it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon, don't be afraid to wait. So we've seen often that what Google says urgently now can often take years to be realized. And ultimately, be aware that Google doesn't really care if your site drives traffic or not. They only care that the people who use their search engine will continue to see paid ad impressions, period. As long as searchers continue to prefer the organic listings over paid, we're going to continue to be fine, because it's something that Google is going to have to take seriously. So if I haven't convinced you yet, I promise to share some more metrics with you, so let me leave you with this. So at Vertical Measures, we continue to monitor changes with the search engines, but for the most part, we're seeing that standard SEO best practices work fine when you're building quality content, and our clients are seeing phenomenal growth. So we analyzed the average increase in organic traffic across our entire client base and found the following. When a client stays with our services for 3 months, on average, they see a 20% increase in organic search traffic. Clients that have stayed with us for a year, they see an increase of 66%. However, when a client is patient enough to stay with us for 2 years, that increase jumps up to a pretty incredible 167%. So tried and true strategy still works, and it still takes time for it to come to full fruition. So I just want to thank you all, and I want to open it up to some questions and answers where we have a few minutes.
All right, well, thanks, Jim. Sorry about those technical difficulties at the beginning. I'm glad you guys stuck around. That was a great webinar. Just a reminder that we will be sending out the recording and the slides tomorrow. And so now we're going to get into those questions. So the first question we got, Jim, was why would Google reduce the site rankings? What's in it for them?
Reduce, I mean, does it, the number of rankings returned in the search results?
Question, I'll read you the exact question I got, just so I don't misquote anyone. It actually was responding in the moment is, but why do you think Google would do that? What's in it for them to reduce sites rankings?
Yeah,
let's just move on from that one. Okay. How do HTTP and HTTPS affect rankings?
So it's about website security, and like I described in the presentation, Google has the position that secure sites are a better experience, and really that's what it is. I mean, if somebody's entering credit card information or they're giving their personal information, it's just making sure that they're not vulnerable and that's all secure. So the messaging that Google put in place was that you could get a boost from it, and that was their way of kind of gently nudging people towards it. But really now that messaging is getting a little bit stronger because they're really putting an emphasis on security for the website visitor.
Okay. All right. This is a long one. This is from former VM employee Chris Humphrey. What is it? Okay. When Google makes outright statements on what they recommend, don't you think they anticipate the implementation taking time, especially for larger companies? It seems like the example showed that they say eventually, what they say eventually trends towards what they do.
I would say that overall, some of that's true. I think that, like the keyword piece, and when they talk about links, I think they're really trying to downplay what works with the algorithm. So I haven't really seen the messaging change a lot with that. So when you're talking about things like HTTPS and mobile first, those things I think Google understands it's going to take time. So they kind of put that message out in the front that, hey, we're headed this direction. I think really what I want people to take away from this presentation is just to measure the urgency. Because especially for enterprise level sites, it's not an easy thing to do and it takes time. So if the point with mobile is, do you take them at their word for the urgency and push out maybe 50% of what you would have done with the mobile site, or do you just take your time and you launch something that you're really proud of that you know the visitors are going to ultimately be more happy with? You know, that's really the point, is just to measure what Google says versus what you think they're going to do.
Okay. Good way to tie it back in. All right, let's do a couple more. It is clear to me that SEO best practices still work, but where would you place social media in a hierarchy of relevance for traffic on a website? The real question is, should I worry for growth on social media over SEO, blog posts, etc.?
So social media is actually one that I had as a slide here for a fifth example, so I'm glad that somebody asked this question. So social media is another one that Google put out a spin on, that we're going to start looking at mentions of your brand name and even the links that are used in social media, and it's going to affect the algorithm. However, we've heard from Google engineers that there's just so much data that they're not really sure how to implement that into the algorithm. So the message there is not that social media isn't important. I think if Google can figure out how to do it, it's going to be a factor. So what I would advise now is do social media because it's a part of your broader marketing campaign, not necessarily for the search engine gain.
Okay, that makes sense. We'll do one more. This one was from the slide that you had earlier in the presentation, and a bullet point says, industry studies may be analyzing very competitive, high-level generic keywords and not vertical specific phrases. The question was, can you go more into what not vertical specific phrases means?
Right. So yeah, to expand on that, what I'm looking at with some of the studies, and what I'm thinking is that they may be looking at really high competitive phrases. And if you're looking at phrases where there could be multiple meanings, there's different semantic variations where Google has to figure out what a person is looking for. If you studied the phrase cats, are they talking about the animal? Are you talking about the play? So I think when you analyze search results from that level, you're going to see different usage of the keywords in the title and all of the elements. But when you go down to specific verticals like the LASIK eye surgery example that I gave, or other ones that are really directly impact the business revenue, I think you're going to get more solid results. And the one that I did show kind of that supports that is that the phrases that companies are really important to their business, they're still using those tried and true best practices.
Okay. And we just have one last question come in. I wanted to ask you, how do you do a toxic link audit on a website?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually pull from 5 different sources because you can actually get different results from different sources. That's what we do. We run with these 5 sources, pull all that data together, and we analyze that and look for places. So a good example is if you start to see a trend, a bunch of links from Russia or India, but you're a US-based company, it's pretty clear that you're probably not getting Russian and Indian and Chinese links that are going to benefit your business. So to us, that would be a red flag. So it's really just pulling all of the data together from the different sources and then analyzing it.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Jim, for coming out and doing this webinar. And thank you all for joining the webinar. We hope you can attend our July webinar with Mark Howell. We'll send out all the information about that in the coming weeks. And then finally, we want to announce that you can download our SEO free guide that we released a couple weeks ago. It's called The Future of SEO Trends in 2017 and Beyond. You can find it on our website under the SEO resource tab. It's a really great, thorough piece with a lot of great influencers in it. If you're into SEO, it's a very beneficial piece. Again, sorry for the malfunction at the beginning. I'm glad you stuck around. It was a great webinar. And again, I'm Zach from Vertical Measures. Thank you and have a great day.